Hello and welcome, it's AJ here, and about to launch into another team preview tonight. Going to be chatting to Matt Stevens. He's the managing editor and writer at the Ravenswire, and you can find him at Matthew with two T's, S_NFL, and obviously the Ravenswire at the Ravenswire. He also writes for USA Today, and I'm about to get him on the line to talk Baltimore Ravens. All right, so we've got Matt on the line right now. Welcome, Matt. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Oh, fantastic. Thanks so much for joining me. And look, it's great to just be talking NFL. I mean, Ravens, yes, fantastic, but look, the NFL's getting ever closer, and that's exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the off season tends to be just kind of the dreaded time. Well, I say dreaded time, but that's really when you go take a vacation. But now we're getting to the time where it's football season, training camps getting ready to open. It's exciting time. It's exciting time. We actually get a chance to see players hit one another again.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the 2018 Ravens did quietly really well. And you know, it's funny because the Ravens are kind of always there. You know, even when you kind of look at their squad and on paper you might say, oh, not sure that they're going to be kind of pushing for playoffs or making any noise. You know, it's a credit to John Harbaugh, really, that and Ozzie Newsome. You know, it's a credit that the Ravens have been sort of thereabouts for so many years.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you can usually, like you mentioned, it's their team that might not necessarily on paper look like they are a playoff team every year. And over the last, 5 years or so, they really haven't done a lot of that. But they've always been in the mix. And I think they play in one of the harder divisions in the league. Certainly there's a little bit of shifting there. But, they're always in the thick of it. They're always entertaining. They're always playing in the final week or two for something. Which is not the same thing you can say for every team in the NFL.
No. And, if we were to play the word association game as a non-Ravens fan, I mean, you ask a non-Ravens fan what comes to mind when you mention the Ravens, it's always going to be tough physical football, and whether that's on, the defense primarily, but the offensive side, like physical hard running. And then always I think of that Steelers matchup, which is fantastic. You always that's a must watch every single season, those Steelers games.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Those are the games that I contend that I don't care what team you like. I don't care if you even like the NFL or not. Those are two games, sometimes three games if they meet in the playoffs,
right, that
you have to watch. If you like football, if you like guys running at each other, not necessarily trying to hurt each other, but man, just on that borderline. If you like seeing real football, 1950s football, the Ravens-Steelers games are always going to be the games you're going to want to watch. They're usually always close. They're always really within the last few minutes of the game, or it's a dramatic blowout in some way, and that's always entertaining too. But they're always a close game. They're always a tough game, and man, these teams do not like each other, but they respect each other, which I think is the epitome of football. If you ask anyone, that's precisely what football should be.
Oh, right. And, it almost doesn't... I mean, look, the Steelers and Ravens are always, they always seem to be in contention. So this doesn't really even seem to be an issue. But I was going to say, no matter what sort of season either or both teams are having, that matchup, they always lift for that game, especially.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's especially at the end of the season. That's usually the game that's going to determine which team either wins the AFC North or which team has a better shot at getting into the playoffs. It always has playoff implications. And even earlier in the season, obviously, once you start kind of counting up games at the end of the year. But that end of the year one is always one that, really will play havoc with the AFC's playoff.
Now, a 10-6 finish last year. I guess the highlight, or one of the highlights being Lamar Jackson taking the team into the playoffs effectively, but a loss to the Chargers, who incidentally were the second team to play Lamar Jackson, which is probably worth kind of mentioning and reflecting on. But what were your thoughts 2018 as a whole?
2018, was kind of a weird year for Baltimore. Obviously, they kind of got started in the same fashion that they always do, which is tough defense, standard defensive play that you come to expect. Joe Flacco throwing an awful lot as a quarterback, which was a little odd because the run game wasn't necessarily working. And then you have that dramatic switch in offensive philosophy. Flacco goes down with a hip injury. You put in Lamar Jackson, and then all of a sudden, everything starts clicking in the run game. They start running off, over 200 yards a game on average over those last handful of games, and just a unique style of play. Obviously, with Jackson being who he is as a rusher with his legs, just a really unique season when it comes to that stuff. And then one thing that I think is super ignored and underrated in this league is that momentum, that swagger that we like to have here in Baltimore. Once things start kind of rolling, that team tends to pick the ball up and just keep going with it. And that's kind of what happened at the end of last season. So a very interesting year, and maybe a little weird one, weird of a one to try to back up in 2019.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And certainly lots of changes. If we have a look at free agency first, I mean, there were some big names that left the building, but there's also some interesting names that came in. I mean, probably the biggest name, Joe Flacco, but I mean, the writing was on the wall really with the Lamar Jackson pick. John Brown and Crabtree, so, your receiving core, basically, leaving the building. Brent Urban, Zadarius Smith, a bit of a loss. Terrell Suggs, CJ Mosley, a massive loss. And Eric Weddle, who's getting on a little bit. But some fairly big names there leaving. But some other names coming in. Mark Ingram's a really good signing. Shane Ray, Pernell McPhee, Justin Bethel, Earl Thomas coming in as well. But so a fair bit of movement. What are your thoughts in general about the free agency period?
Baltimore usually does a pretty good job of being able to spread that type of stuff out. They usually don't lose that many key players. Zadarius Smith, Terrell Suggs, CJ Mosley. Those are really big hits. Baltimore really didn't expect to lose Terrell Suggs. They figured they were going to be able to retain him, and they kind of counted on that. And you can see that in a little bit of what the roster make-up is right now in one of their weak spots at outside linebacker. But CJ Mosley, they knew he was going to get a huge deal. They knew Zadarius Smith was going to get a big deal. And like I said, usually they're able to spread that out so that way it's not all one off-season that they lose those guys. This off-season, a little bit of a weird off-season. But Baltimore's hoping that they've been grooming some guys beneath those guys to try to pick up the slack. They've gotten a lot younger in this offseason. Obviously, when you lose a guy like Eric Weddle, who I believe is 36, you lose Terrell Suggs, who's right in that ballpark as well. You got some guys that were at the top of the league in terms of age. You got rid of them, and you're not going to try to replace them with guys in their early 20s. There's going to be some hiccups. There's going to be some problems there. But ultimately, if you look at any team in this league that does well long-term, they're able to go ahead and cycle those older guys out and get the younger guys in there that maybe don't necessarily play at quite the same level, but they do so at a fraction of the cost. And, you mentioned Ozzie Newsome earlier. His philosophy here in Baltimore has been, if I can get a guy for 80% of the production at 20% of the pay, I'll do that all day long.
Right. A lot of the draft was kind of dictated by the losses, I guess, because Marquise Brown and Miles Boykin, two fairly, on film, fantastic receivers coming into the building. Justice Hill, who I love. Man, I love this kid, and he could be fantastic in the backfield. Jalen Ferguson, I don't know a lot about. Ben Powers, Aman Marshall, a cornerback safety. So, certainly you can see some positions of need being filled, whether these guys sort of pan out or not. But what was your feeling of the draft in general?
Well, you mentioned wide receivers, Boykin and Marquise Brown. Baltimore really had to do that. This is their second consecutive year where they've just gone, this wide receiver core isn't working out. Get rid of them all. Let's start over again. They needed to bring some young guys in. Obviously, you got Lamar Jackson at quarterback. You have some time. You need to go ahead and develop wide receivers, certainly when they're making borderline quarterback money out in free agency. you can't really sign those guys and expect to be able to, do a lot anywhere else in free agency. So drafting those guys, that's precisely what they need to do. And Baltimore really hasn't done that. We're talking about, I can't remember the exact number now, but I believe, in franchise history, we're looking at like 5 to 7 guys taken in the first 3 rounds, wide receivers taken in the first 3 rounds. They have not done that a whole lot. So they really had to in order to build for the future there. And you hope both those guys turn out as rookies, but that's a long-term building thing. Jalen Ferguson is really the answer to Terrell Suggs leaving. So much so that actually Ferguson broke Suggs' NCAA sacks record last year. So they really did pick up the guy who is Terrell Suggs, at least who they're hoping is Terrell Suggs. And then the rest of it's just kind of restocking the back end of the roster. Ben Powers, maybe he'll play this year. Maybe he'll start this year. He's in the competition for that. But that's a year or two down the line, realistically, where you're going to go ahead and plug him in at left guard. You got a cornerback, Iman Lewis Marshall, again, type of thing where you're hoping in 2-3 years that he's able to go ahead and step up and become a starter or at least an impact player. So you're completely right. Free agency and the losses dictated a lot of what they did, but Baltimore has always been one that goes after the best player available within reason and tries to stock up their roster for the future more so than anything else.
Now, let's have a look at some of the positions on the offense, and I guess the first one, or the biggest question, is Lamar Jackson. And certainly had a really exciting end to the season. The Chargers really wrecked him in the playoffs, limited him to 14 of 29 passing, 194 yards, 4 turnovers. And I guess the big question is, can he be a pocket passer? Because, I mean, we've seen that he's got the legs. That's not at issue, but certainly you don't want to be one-dimensional. And I think the Chargers certainly showed that they could kind of cage him in that regard and turn him into a one-dimensional player. So I guess the question is, can he become a pocket passer? And certainly when you look at his college film, he was pretty good from the pocket. So I guess it's just a question of can he do it in this scheme and at the NFL level?
Yeah, certainly, and that's going to be the big question until it stops being the question. Either he'll do it, or eventually they'll let him kind of go down the line. But that's going to be the biggest question every offseason until we see him do it. And I think so. I think when you see Lamar, when you see him throw, you can pinpoint exactly what the issue is, which is just his mechanics. He tends to get a little bit of happy feet, which is very common for rookie quarterbacks, and especially common for rookie mobile quarterbacks. Lamar is used to being able to run circles around everybody. It's a little different here in the NFL where everyone runs 4.3, 4.4, type speeds. It's a changing competition with that. So he's got a little bit of happy feet. He needs to settle down. He needs to focus on his mechanics and really build that in until it's muscle memory. Once that happens, I think you really see Lamar go ahead and take a giant leap up as a passer. We saw some flashes of that last year. We saw him, there's one throw to Michael Crabtree, and I can't remember what game it is in now, but he had a 1-foot window in which he throws that ball. And it actually has to be behind Michael Crabtree, because if he throws it in front of him, he's leading him right into a defender who can make a play on the ball, or at the very least can knock Michael Crabtree out of the game. He has to throw it behind, and he has to throw it in a very tight window. He nails that throw dead on. But then we've also seen him one-hop a ball to Willie Snead as well. That was 5 feet in front of him. So, I think we've seen the flashes of what Lamar can do as a quarterback, but we've also seen the floor of that as well, which is kind of scary when you're talking about a guy that you need to lead the team. As far as the Chargers game goes in the wild card in the playoffs, I really peg a lot of that loss and a lot of Jackson's issues there more on offensive coordinator Marty Mornhinweg, who is now gone. They replaced him with Greg Roman. But in the first 3 quarters, they didn't really let Jackson throw the ball at all. Despite the run not working, despite the Chargers selling out against their run and doing everything they possibly could to contain Lamar Jackson, they didn't really let him throw until the 4th quarter. Once he started actually throwing, it was a little too late, but Jackson was able to start kind of picking things apart a little bit better and start to march down the field. We saw some of that. So, That's been Baltimore's issue for the last decade now, even with Joe Flacco, is it's a combination of quarterback play mixed with bad offensive coordinating and not going with the strengths of your team against the weaknesses of another team and just plugging along doing the same thing for 4 quarters and wondering why it doesn't work. So there's hope that Greg Roman, he's doing a new scheme now. There's hope that kind of helps Lamar Jackson make that transition a little bit easier, use his strengths properly, but then also limit his weaknesses through either short throws, quick throws, things that are a little bit easier to diagnose and a little easier to hit. You hope that guys are able to get a little more separation. So I think Lamar can do it ultimately, but time will tell, and we'll see that in training camp, which opens up today for us.
Yeah, how exciting. And certainly one thing that hopefully will support Lamar in his continued development is the O-line, maybe, but it's a bit of a mixed bag, and I'm interested to hear your take on this because there's certainly Ronnie Stanley and Marshall Yonder are great, and then conversely you've got Matt Skura and Alex Lewis who are not great, and Orlando Brown is, he's okay, he's young, he's sort of on the uptick, but it is a bit of a mixed bag though. What are your thoughts? Yeah.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. You've got Ronnie Stanley, who's the left tackle, is one of the better young left tackles in the league, certainly a guy that they're going to have to pay over the next coming years. And you've got Marshall Yanda, who, offensive linemen do not typically make it into the Hall of Fame. Marshall Yanda is one guy that you pretty much ask anyone who pays attention to football, and they go, yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. The guy's been fantastic throughout his entire career. Even at his age now, he's still arguably one of the best linemen in the league. That's outstanding.
Yeah.
I'll say this, Orlando Brown Jr. on the right side at right tackle, I think he's a little underrated. Obviously, everyone wants to see him do it for a second year. They want to see that continued success. But, he pancaked T.J. Watt last year in one of the Steelers games, and he was, an above-average run blocker. He actually gave up very few pressures. I think total all in the year, he gave up something to the effect of 18 pressures throughout the entire season last year, which was one of the best rates in the NFL. So, Orlando Brown, I think he doesn't necessarily get a lot of credit, but this is a year that I'm expecting him to step up and play like Ronnie Stanley, but on the right-hand side. So they seem to have their outside edges set. You've got right guard set. Now the question becomes, can you go ahead and beef up the inside of that line? Matt Skura, like you mentioned, at center, hopefully either he takes a leap in his second year playing, or you replace him with a guy like Bradley Bozeman, who they drafted last year to kind of actually take his job this year. Same thing kind of happens at left guard. You've got kind of a weird mix of, you got James Hurst, who they signed last offseason based on his play at left guard and then tried to stick him at right tackle, which just didn't work. So maybe that's the answer there. Maybe not. You got Alex Lewis, who, when he's healthy, is really good, but sadly he's been about as healthy as I was in my football career, which was not very often.
Right.
And then you got Ben Powers, you've got Jermaine Illuminor, you've got a bunch of different guys there. So there's a competition there that you hope kind of brings out the best and brings in some good players. But I certainly think Baltimore could have done more this offseason in free agency to pick up a really good center and bolster that offensive line and really kind of tie it together. And they didn't, but it seems like they have an answer over the next year or two on what they really want to do there.
Yeah, and look, it'll be interesting because of what it does to the run game. And obviously, you've got to respect Lamar Jackson's run game. That's, he's got the runs on the board, so to speak. But, the Ravens have always... It's been a rare year that you would not say, oh, the Ravens have got one of the best run units in the league. You often can say that, and the addition of Mark Ingram, who is, I think just incredibly underrated. He's always sort of been underrated. Is a great addition. Yeah. I love the Justice Hill draft pick, and I've been a bit of a Kenneth Dixon truther, but the guy can't kind of get out of his own way, sadly. Yeah. But he's, man, when you sort of see him in full flight, he is, just like a little whippet. He's all over the place. which is awesome. It would be great to actually see him sort of make some noise. I don't know if we will, but the backfield looks pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's probably one of the strengths of Baltimore right now. And in doing the 53-man roster and doing some of those predictions, man, that's a tough position to figure out. Do they keep 3 running backs? Do they keep 4? A lot of that's going to depend on how Kenneth Dixon does, as you mentioned. If he can stay healthy, if he can be productive in training camp and in preseason, he very well might make a case for that 4th spot at running back. But, Mark Ingram, you also have Gus Edwards, who kind of took over for Alex Collins last year, came off the practice squad, kind of did an Alex Collins-like thing where came off the practice squad, showed up, and really started putting the yards down there on the ground. We'll see if he can continue that for his second year, but, Baltimore seems to be confident in him to do that, and they have him labeled as the top running back right now. You've got Mark Ingram, who is, like you said, an underrated guy, both as a running back. He's never really gotten a lot of credit there, but also as a receiver out of the backfield, which is something that Baltimore hasn't truly had since Ray Rice a bunch of years ago, and something that they love to use with their young quarterbacks. Give them that pressure release valve. If someone's on you, your running back's going to be open. You got a sure-handed guy. It might not be a home run every single time. It might not be a touchdown. It might not be 20 yards, but that's a way to get the ball out of your hands quickly to a guy who's going to be able to try to do something with it, and hopefully that works out. And then Justice Hill, I think, is kind of the number 2 in that 1-2 punch. You've got Ingram and you've got Gus Edwards, who are kind of more power backs than they are elusive. Hill is the guy that you put in there if you want to go ahead and run a 4-3. If you want to turn it into a sprint down the field, Hill's your man. So they seem to kind of have all their bases covered when it comes to running back, and certainly Lamar Jackson, you're going to throw him in there as well for a speed option and a little bit of misdirection. So that's a scary unit. If I'm a defense, man, that's I'm a little concerned about how I have to cover all those guys. Like I said, both coming through the line and as a receiver.
Yeah. Oh, I agree with you 100%. And yeah, I didn't mention Gus Edwards, and he's just a solid depth piece, isn't he? He's really, as you said, I mean, he'll make the 53, but I mean, the Justice Hill pick, when that dropped, I was just like, well, that's Kenneth Dixon really on the bubble now, basically.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sadly. But the guy's, he's had some bad luck, but he's also, squandered some opportunity as well. Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. 2 suspensions for stupid things tend to not help, especially when you've missed that many games due to injury, and it's kind of a self-inflicted shot to the foot where, if you can't see the field, getting yourself off the field because you're suspended does not do well with kind of a more authoritarian type of coach in John Harbaugh. That's the type of thing that puts you in the doghouse pretty fast over here.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Now, we've spoken about the wide receiver core a little bit already. It might actually be more interesting to talk about the tight end group because obviously last year the Ravens drafted 2 tight ends, and I think was Hayden Hurst the first one drafted and Mark Andrews the second?
Yeah, Hayden Hurst was a first-round pick, actually taken before Lamar Jackson, and then Mark Andrews was 3rd round, so yeah.
Yeah, I thought it was something like that. But it does look like Mark Andrews, certainly Mark Andrews got out of the blocks quicker. And it certainly seems like he's got a bit of a better connection with Lamar Jackson. But having said that, the tight end position does, there's a bit of a learning curve. What's your feeling in terms of where that competition will be this year with Hayden Hurst?
So, Hayden had a foot injury. He missed the first 4 games. Actually had to have a screw inserted into his foot. And in talking to him a little bit and hearing a little bit about his story, he was never really 100%. His foot hurt the entire season. He wasn't able to get up to full speed. And, blocking, running, trying to catch the football, trying to do all those things. If your feet are hurt, if they're sore, if they're uncomfortable, it really takes all your power out. And as a tight end, that's what your game is, your power. So, Hayden Hurst kind of had a bad rookie season, but there's an explanation for it. And hopefully he's healthy now. He says he's healthy now. He says, screws out. He has a chip on his shoulder. He's ready to go out there and start punching people and really getting after it, which is exactly what you want to see from a tight end. But you're right. Andrews really did have kind of the breakout rookie season. And when you compare him to other rookie seasons for tight ends, I mean, the guy, it's a favorable comparison to guys like Gronkowski or Travis Kelce or those types of guys. You hope he's able to continue it forward and keep kind of being that. But realistically, Mark Andrews kind of is just a slot receiver. That's where he played most last year. He's a big, tall, pretty fast guy. So he's just that big-bodied slot receiver that, again, Baltimore loves to utilize there. So he's going to be the guy that's going to, he's going to be a receiver. He's going to be the guy that's going to be out there for those. But you don't want him blocking. If he's out there trying to block somebody, something went wrong.
Right. Right.
So, to the bookend to that, the opposite side of that is Nick Boyle, who they re-signed this offseason on a 3-year deal. He's the guy he's the blocker. He's going to be out there most plays, essentially lining up as an additional tackle. And that's what you're going to use him as. He can catch, but not really his forte, not really the thing they're going to use him as. So you've got your two opposites, and then Hayden Hurst kind of is the middle ground. He's a really good blocker. He's also a short-handed, pretty solid receiver. So if he's able to come into his own, you have a really nice mix. As far as competition goes, all three of them are making the roster. It's just a matter of what formula do they create as a whole. And a lot of that's going to depend on Hayden Hurst's health and how he performs in training camp, I think.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, the Ravens have always been a team that, or certainly in my recent memory, have always really featured the tight end, and I never knew if that was like a Joe Flacco thing or if it was a Harbaugh thing or a scheme thing. But the tight end has always been a really featured position, though.
Yeah, it harkens back to kind of the old school football, which is tight end heavy. Both as receivers and additional blockers. Obviously, a run-heavy offensive scheme, which Baltimore's typically had. You're able to go ahead and use a tight end, again, like I said, as an extra tackle, effectively, in the run game. But then you're also able to kind of, a little bit of misdirection, a little bit of confusion, in that you're then able to go ahead and put them out on routes. A little play action to the tight end. It's a beautiful thing. It works well. And it's typically, again, it's a helpful thing for young quarterbacks because those guys are able to typically get a lot of separation or no separation. So it's an easier throw to make. But, when you have Ozzie Newsome, who was a Hall of Fame tight end for the Cleveland Browns for a bunch of years, I think, a little bit of that rubs off in the scheme as well. When you got that guy making your choices for you, you tend to favor the tight end a little bit more too.
Yeah, for sure. Let's go across to the defense, and this is not your usual Ravens defense. So we're missing some big names, as we sort of spoke about earlier, and it's going to be interesting to see if we kind of recognize it. I'm sure they'll bring the boom, as they always do, but. It's it's interesting. I guess the first question is, where's the pass rush going to come from? Because, Zadarius Smith, obviously a loss. Suggs, obviously, also a big loss. They were 6th in pass rushing efficiency last year, but at the moment, I guess you're looking at young guys like Matthew Judon, Tyus Bowser, Tim Williams, Shane Ray, obviously coming in, or Jalen Ferguson, who was the 3rd-round pick last year. So, it's a bit of a different line than we're used to.
It is. And you mentioned Zadarius Smith left in free agency, Terrell Suggs left in free agency. Those were your two most productive pass rushers last year. The team lost 15 sacks with those guys leaving, and quite a lot of quarterback hits, or quite a lot of pressure. So now it really falls, like you mentioned, Matthew Judon effectively becomes the leader simply because he's the only guy that's actually produced on this roster. Tim Williams hasn't really done anything over the last 2 years. He's been a healthy scratch, actually, most of his career, which is kind of telling for a team that needs a pass rush. If the guy's not getting on the field, it's probably because he can't really do a lot on the field at this point. You got Tyus Bowser, who, just like Tim Williams, hasn't really put it together. He's been active for more often, but he's kind of a unique player, a hybrid type of player that isn't really a great pass rusher by itself, but he's got a lot of agility, he's got a lot of speed, so kind of maybe a coverage linebacker, outside linebacker, maybe the guy you put in there on your standard 1 and 2 downs, and then your third down, then you go ahead and switch out to a situational pass rusher. So, a weird situation going on there, and who's going to generate the pass rush? I think Baltimore would love if anyone has that answer. I'm sure they would like a phone call to figure that out. Because training camp is I think going to be the point where they go, who can do this? Who can't? Do we need to bring somebody else in? What do we do in order to figure this out? Because they're not looking like they're in great shape right now from outside linebacker, certainly at a pass rush especially. So it's a lot of question marks there, and probably the weakest unit on this entire roster is that outside linebacker.
Yes, absolutely. I was going to add into that I hadn't really mentioned the interior of the line yet, but I mean the interior of the line is looking fine. I mean Michael Pierce, Brandon Williams, Chris Wormley. It's going to be hard to run against the interior for sure.
Yeah, I mean Baltimore's defensive line is always outstanding. I mean, like you mentioned, all those guys are kind of the stalwarts of that defensive line.
Yeah, and that makes missing CJ Mosley maybe not hurt it quite as much because, I mean, he was a good run stuffer. He probably wasn't so good at pass pro, but, you can probably cover his loss a little bit easier given those guys in the interior of the line.
Yeah, I think Mosley got a lot of flack as far as coverage skills, and I think when you look at that, the guys that he tended to fail against or tend to have issues with are guys like Le'Veon Bell. Well, yeah, I mean, Le'Veon Bell just signed a huge deal this year, despite sitting out last year, and not playing a down of football in well over a year now, because he's one of the best at making great linebackers do that. So, CJ Mosley didn't get a lot of credit, certainly from Ravens fans, when it came to stuff like that, because you'd see him trailing a guy like Le'Veon Bell by a few yards, but it's like, well, there's a reason why Le'Veon Bell is going to earn well over $10 million a year, and that's because he's able to make C.J. Mosley look like a fool at times. So I think Mosley was far better of a player than a lot of people gave him credit for, certainly as a coverage linebacker, but, there are guys that you can step in there to do a little bit better with that, but aren't going to obviously be as good of a run stopper. So, yeah, you have a good combination of Chris Board, Patrick Onwuasu, and Kenny Young, who will kind of ultimately make up Mosley as a whole by throwing those guys around.
Yeah, I was about to mention those guys. Yes, absolutely, I agree. And, the secondary's a good unit too. I sort of wonder, they'll have a little bit more pressure on them undoubtedly with the reduction in the pass rush, and that will be interesting to see how that plays out. But Marlon Humphrey, Jimmy Smith, Brandon Carr, obviously the addition of Earl Thomas, although he hasn't played a full season since 2015, and Tony Jefferson, who's a pretty talented young guy in the defensive backfield. But all in all, across the back, it's a good unit.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I contend that this is the best secondary in football without any question. Arguably, you have 3 starters at cornerback. You've got Brandon Carr, who has been one of the better outside cornerbacks, most consistent outside cornerbacks, has not missed a single game his entire career, which is a feat in and of itself. You've got Marlon Humphrey, who really kind of started showing up last season. Well, he showed up his first season, his rookie season, but really kind of stepped up his play last season, and arguably is one of the few true quote-unquote shutdown cornerbacks in this league still. And then you've got Jimmy Smith, who, when healthy, is a Pro Bowl-type player. That's the question mark there, but certainly I think if you ask a majority of the teams here and you were able to say, look, which one of these guys is going to start with your defense, most defensive coordinators would say, yeah, any of them. Give me any of them, and any of them will start here. So that's a really good thing. We've got Tavon Young as one of the better nickel corners, slot corners in this league. And you've got a lot of depth. You've got Anthony Avery. You've got Iman Lewis Marshall, like we mentioned earlier, as a draft pick. He's in there. They're going to have to make some serious cuts at cornerback, especially just to make the roster. And there's a bunch of guys that I think, especially on a few of the lower teams, even Baltimore's depth would start there. So you've got that. You've got Tony Jefferson, who, when he's playing as a typical strong safety, which he hasn't over the last few years, is one of the best strong safeties in the league. And now you've got Earl Thomas, who is, your Ed Reed type player, your ball hawking free safety, but can come down, lay down a shoulder on a guy coming over the middle and make him regret catching that football. I contend this is the best secondary in football, bar none.
Yeah, look, you could argue that easily. I think it wouldn't have too much trouble. It'd be hard to sort of put up some alternatives. Now, looking at 2019, looking at the season ahead, lots of question marks. This is a tough one, I admit. Certainly, if there's one thing you could say about John Harbaugh, he's maintained a really dominant home field for the Ravens in his tenure as head coach. I think you're 67-24 since 2008. You won the division last year, but yeah, lots of questions. What's your feeling in terms of how they're going to do this year?
I think a lot of it's going to depend on how Lamar Jackson does, obviously. We've talked this entire time about how the core of the team is really good, but there's some outliers. There's some big questions. How that all ties together, I think, is ultimately what will decide how good of a year they have. But, this is a team that is, I think, when you look at what they're doing right now, when you look at the 4-year new contract they signed for John Harbaugh this offseason, it matches up well with Lamar Jackson has 4 more years left if you give him his 5th-year option. This is a team that seems to be kind of building for the future, building for the next few years, more so than this specific year. I think, a solid showing, I think a 10-6 year, they should be incredibly happy with. But ultimately this year is going to be about seeing what guys can step up, trying to figure out that roster a little bit more, certainly at wide receiver, at outside linebacker, at some of those positions inside the offensive line. I think this is a team that can do just as well as they did last year ultimately, but it's the long-term goal that's now kind of should be the eye of what this team is looking to do.
Now, a question to round us out, a question that I've been asking all our guests for our team previews, and this is a little out of the box, so I'm going to surprise you with it. So we're fast forward a year. If you had to write a headline for this season upcoming, what would it be?
Oh, that is a great question. Oh, man, that is a fantastic question. Oh, wow. Oh, man, a year from now?
Yeah.
So we're getting ready to enter training camp. I think, the headline, there's a few of them that I could probably write. One of them is this the year that Lamar Jackson finally becomes a consistent quarterback? I think that's still going to be the question you're asking next year. I think we still have another headline that is going to be, who's going to step up at pass rush? I don't know. I think this is next year. I think you can probably make a pretty solid case, depending on what they do in free agency. They'll have some money. So I think the headline that I'll end up writing next year is going to be, are the Ravens the best team in the AFC? Nice.
I like it. Hey, you've got to have that optimism. And look, I think, Lamar, I agree with you with Lamar, and sometimes fans can be impatient too. I mean, the quarterback position is famously, on the world stage, it's one of the hardest positions in all of sport. I mean, we've got to give the guy some time.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a reason why they selected him in the first round with the last pick in the first round. And it's because they wanted that 5th-year option. The Ravens went into Lamar Jackson, went into drafting him going, the guy's going to need 5 years. He's going to take 5 years.
Yeah.
Anyone who expects him to turn into Tom Brady this year is just asking for disappointment. And, hey, if it happens, fantastic. I'll be the first one to say that I saw it coming all along. But the reality is it's going to take him some time to get there. If he makes steady improvement, if we see him improve here in training camp over what he did last year at training camp, hey, you know what? That's a win. I can consider that a really positive thing. I just want to see that every year from him. And I think, this year we still see some of those weird passes from him, some of that inconsistency. Hopefully next year when we're writing headlines, it's a matter of just continuing that progression for him. And I hope that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. No, sounds good. Matt, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting Ravens with you, and we can get pumped. The season's getting closer and closer. As you said, training camp. Well, by the time this pod comes out, which will be in a few days' time, training camp will have kicked off, and all the news is already starting to come in, which is great. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, like I said, when we're recording this, training camp actually opens up later today. So by the time this comes out, we'll be a few days into training camp. We'll have hopefully some answers to some questions that we had kind of here start to brewing, especially at wide receiver, especially at outside linebacker. But, it's exciting, man. It's exciting. As we kind of talked before we started recording, it's football time again. It's nice to see guys hitting each other. It's nice to see guys out in the field doing this again. It's nice to start rooting for some people and some teams.
Oh, absolutely. Now, you mentioned that you live just outside of Baltimore. Are you heading to training camp at all?
Yeah. I'll be at training camp a little bit. We're actually expecting our first baby here. So
lovely. Congratulations.
Thank you. So it's gonna throw a monkey wrench in my season this year, but I'll make it up to training camp a few days this year, and we'll make sure to see the players kind of in action.
Very nice, very nice. So if it's a boy, it's Ray Lewis Stevens, is it?
Yeah. Actually, it's gonna be a girl, and we're still coming up with names, still trying to figure it out, but I'll incorporate something Ravens oriented in there for sure.
Oh, Raylene, perhaps Raylene.
You know what? That's not a bad one. I'll run that past my wife.
Oh, very nice. Well, congratulations to you. And I mentioned your Twitter handle at the start of at the top, but at the Ravens Wire, they can catch all your content there. And I frequently do look through as I sort of troll through all my sort of Twitter followers and things. There's frequently good stuff on there, so I'd encourage Ravens fans, but just all fans, just to check out the Ravens Wire, and lots of content dropping there for sure.
Absolutely, yeah. We're getting back into the thick of it, so you can expect quite a lot of content every single day from us. And I try to answer questions as best I can on Twitter, so make sure you follow me there to get me a little bit more insight than what I can actually put into articles. And feel free to reach out to me and ask me any questions along the way, guys.
Perfect. Matt, thanks so much for your time. It's been fantastic chatting to you.
Oh, thank you. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, it's always nice to go ahead and talk football. So anytime you want to have me on, feel free to just give me a shout.
Awesome. We'd love to. Maybe we'll catch you next year. Would it be perfect? Or if the Ravens go into the playoffs as we think that they may, then maybe we'll hit you up then and get your thoughts.
Oh, that sounds like a plan.
Perfect. All right, well, enjoy your day. I'm about to hit the sack here, but you've got your day ahead of you, so have a good one.
Yes. You too, man. You too. Be safe and enjoy.
Will do. Well, that was fantastic chatting to Matt Stevens from the Ravens Wire. That was awesome, and certainly Ravens are always a great team. I love watching the Ravens because they're just such a physical, tough team, and always good physical football, defensive football as well, which is what I have a preference for. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that. Another team preview in the books, and another one coming. In fact, another one I'm recording, I should say, tomorrow, but they're coming thick and fast now. So thanks, everybody, for listening. And on behalf of G and myself, even though G's not here, thanks for listening. Catch you next time.